Hello and welcome to another video. I can say it this time. Welcome to another video. Um, so as you might have saw at the end of the last one, I left it at a bit of a cliffhanger with the Herod thing because one of the biggest things about it, whenever I read through the Bible, like I said in the last video, I had just gotten to Acts. Um, but whenever I'm reading through, I'm missing a lot of the cultural context. I'm missing a lot of the um character context. I'm missing like it that's one of the problems with hopping in like this without treating it like it's history is that these are real people from real history that are really in here. Whether you believe the context of it, with the spiritual or supernatural aspects of it, that right there is a history book. All right. But it is a history book. Real people. These are real people that are really in here, really in history. it it's a factual book. Now, whether the supernatural aspects in it or not, that is up for debate. But real, real stuff. All right, or at the very least, real people. But that's something that I thought would be interesting for me to do because the first question that I had whenever I started reading the Gospels was who was King Herod? Like, yeah, he was this guy that supposedly, orchestrated the massacre of the innocents, I think is what it's called, where he sent people out to kill. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. Um, but anyway, that was just my question: is just who was King Herod? All right, because it doesn't seem like a nice guy from what I read. And so I did some research, and by some research, I mean I read Wikipedia, as any good researcher does. There are other aspects of it that I may search up later or I may do later. If so, I will add them in and let you guys know. Otherwise, this is just from Wikipedia. I have condensed it and put it together into this video format so that it can be better there. I will link everything that I've gotten everything from in the description so that if you want to go read it or check it out, you can. Um, Wikipedia is not a great site for sources because anyone can go in there and type stuff. Let's get into this on who is King Herod. Well, it depends on which one you're talking about because within the Bible there are actually three King Herods, all within the same family. There was Herod the Great, his son Herod the Second, and then apparently there's a third Herod in Acts. But like I said, I have not read that, so I do not know. This is blank that's blank information, nor does it have anything to do because it's not the Herod we're talking about here. We're talking about baby Jesus Herod. We're talking about bad man Herod, the founder of the Herodian dynasty. All right. Um, and that's a legitimate phrase. Like he founded the Herodian dynasty. Now, granted, I would argue that Rome founded the Herodians dynasty, but we'll get there. Here is a quick little introduction into Herod. We will go more into depth here in a second, but this is just a quick introduction of who he is. All right. There were actually five Herods. The one we are going to focus on today was known as Herod the Great, King Herod the Great, who was a Roman appointed king of Judea. His father was Antipater the Idumean, and his mother was Cypros, a Nabatean Arab princess from Petra. And they were Second Temple Jerusalem worshiping Jews. Because his mother was of Arab descent and so was his father, they were, he was of Arab descent, and his family actually acclimated to the Jewish culture during a takeover. They were originally pagans, I guess, or something along those lines, but during the time whenever the high priests were kind of governing the area, they forced people to come into the religion, and that was what happened with his parents, I believe. Both of his parents being from Arab descent, obviously he was Arab. Um, and he was a descendant of the Hasmonean dynasty. And the Hasmonean dynasty was from 141 to 378 BC. So it lasted for a little less than 100 years. So about two generations. But during that time, during the Hasmonean dynasty, whenever they were taking over, they actually forced people to become Jews And so that was actually how Herod's family became Jewish, was that they had to acclimate or else get out. Um, but even with that, they seem to have adopted the culture fairly well because his father was actually a high-ranking official under the high priest at the time. Uh, hi, some these names, man. Hyrcanus the second. His title was eth ethnarch, like a monarch over an ethnicity, the Jewish ethnicity. But it was a theocracy. It was a religious-based form of government. He was born in 72 BCE in Idumea, an area south of Judea. But that doesn't mean that they didn't acclimate well because his father was actually a high-ranking official under the high priest at the time, Hyrcanus the second, and his title was that he was an ethnarch. And so that goes, and that is a monarch over a certain ethnicity. He was the king of the Jews at the time, but it was a theocracy and not how later on it would be introduced. But that connection right there allowed him to make a connection inside of Rome as a whole, because Rome at this time had actually come in and invaded because Pompey, Emperor Pompey the Great, I I think that's what his name was, Pompey the Great. I'm pretty positive. Don't quote me on that. So Pompey the Great actually came in and conquered the entirety of the Hasmonean dynasty. And whenever he did that, he more or less left the governing to them, but just forced them to pay taxes. All right. And that worked for a long time because it's like, okay, well, we have to work and we have to pay taxes and stuff like that, sure. But then things got a little bit dicey, to say the least. But we'll get there too. King Herod, ruled for 37 years, but spent the first three of it conquering Jerusalem. King Herod's reign was from 37 to 4 BCE, or from 36 to 1 BCE. It's very shaky on the time frame, but around that time. I don't care about the semantics. We have an approximate time frame. So he ruled up into his mid 30s. And whenever that it would which mid 30s back then was the life expectancy for the average person. Kings and things like that were not the average people. They typically lived to be a little bit older, probably about 50, 55, 60-ish, something like that. Rome appointed Herod the provisional governor, was his title, the provisional governor of Galilee, which whenever he was anywhere from 15 to 28 years old, 15 comes the original Greek manuscript, but some people say that he was originally 25. It's 25 to 28 is the original consensus, but the original Greek says 15, and based off of the age stuff back then, I'm willing to believe it was 15. All around there. All right. I'm willing to split the difference, say he was about 2021 ish. All right. It doesn't really matter what age he came into his throne. What matters is what he did after he came into that throne. All right. But actually, he seemed to be doing a good job because he was able to rid the area of all of the bandits.
Did you know there has been a marked drop in thievery?
I did not know. And how did you accomplish this marked drop in thievery?
Me and the lads rounded up all the known thieves.
For questioning?
No.
But anyway, so he did that to go and put himself in good standing with Rome because he's there to govern. If he can keep the peace and get rid of the bandits that are causing problems, hey, that's all the more for everyone else. Let's go. So after he was in good standing with Rome, he kind of hatched a plot to himself because there was this other king who had previously held him in prison under accusation of murder. And his great idea was, hey, let me go kill that guy. To which his elder brother and father were like, hey, hold on a minute. Maybe we don't do that. Now things are going so swell for our family. Um, to which he was like, yeah, yeah, sure, whatever. But anyway, in 41 BCE, Heron and his brother Faisal became tetrarchs, and they were plants there to support Hyrcanus the second, to try and implement a more Roman rule All right, they were a plant, like what we would call like an industry plant today. They were an industry plant for the Jewish temple back then. But that was before his nephew took the throne from him back in 40 BCE. And after that happened, Herod fled to Rome, and the Senate named him King of the Jews. All right, and came back to the land with an army. All right. Um, Now, whenever he goes, and this goes into the 3 years that he spent conquering Jerusalem. It was a long war because after he established himself as king, the nephew, he goes and he was able to set up a stronghold because it took Herod time to get to Rome. It took Rome to make the decision to make him the king, and it took time for them to gather the forces and then go back. So he goes, and we're gonna side hop here for just a second, all right? Because something else that I didn't mention in that introduction is that he actually was married 5 different times, all right? I'm only gonna go into three of them, but there were five in total. All right. So during this entire time, he was married to a woman named Doris, and he had a son. All right. But towards the end of the war, and after he had been made king of the Jews, he um said "fuck you" and just completely exiled them because he wanted to marry his second wife, Mariamne. Mariamne the First was the granddaughter of Hyrcanus the Second. And he did that. He married her specifically for political reasons. It was to bring the Herodian dynasty, or what would eventually be the Herodian dynasty, and the Herodians dynasty, or however you pronounce that. The take the two dynasties and try to merge them together as peacefully as they could, typically through marriage, which is how that was done back then. And that was how that happened. But he had to exile his wife and kid to do it. Okay? Another thing about her is that she apparently had mothered two children to her, but one was exiled with her, and the other one is presumed to have died of young age, which is very, very sad. But I wanted to mention that, and so we'll go into the third wife here too, because there's not really a good place to hop in there too. So the third one's actually just I'm putting in there just like a little fun fact because it threw me off whenever I read the name. The name of his last wife was Cleopatra of Jerusalem. And it took me just a second. So I'm like, there's no way. Which I was correct. There was no way. um, but it was not her. It was somebody else. And I just thought that it was funny that King Herod, the guy that, tried to supposedly kill Jesus, whenever he was a baby, had a wife named Cleopatra, and he sucked ass up to Rome. It's just all kinds of it's just all kinds of ironies. So Herod and the Syrian governor at the time, Saucius, Saucius, he's the sauciest, set out with an army to capture Jerusalem, and at the same time he was sending the nephew of the guy that did the coup. I can't pronounce his name. It's Antigonus, something like that. To Rome for execution. And Herod named himself the Basileus, which is Greek for king or emperor or something along that effect. But he was still very much under Rome, like he was a vassal state, something like that. Can't remember if it's called vessel or vassal. I think it's vassal. But he was a vassal state for Rome, and they didn't care what he called himself. They didn't care what they did as long as they knew and he knew. Hey, we're the shot callers. We say jump, you say how high. And so this caused a tear, all right, because the Jewish people did not like the Romans because they came in and conquered them during the Pompeian times, all right? And since then they were kind of been living under Rome's thumb. And so having your king bow down to Rome so eagerly leaves a bad taste in the Jewish people's mouth. And I cannot blame them for that. Like it would me too. But while that was the case, Herod still very publicly aligned himself as a Jew. He was the king of the Jews. And in the mention on the Wikipedia article that I looked at, it did mention that he had several baths that were a mixture of Roman cold water baths and ceremonial cleansing baths that Jewish people back then used for cleansing ceremonies. And so he had to hold the ceremony in some kind of reverence in order to have those ceremonial things, or at least the half ceremonial things inside of his residence. However, I feel like that was more of just a really cool invention that he was like, Put 1,000 of them in. I love them. I want everybody to use them. Fine, patent pending." Right after Herod's ascension to king, he faced two main threats to his reign. One was his mother-in-law, who was the daughter of Hyrcanus II, who was the high priest, as you remember from 5 minutes ago. So, so she wanted the Herodian part of the country to kind of overcome it, kind of be like, eating like this the big snake eat little snake, but little snake eat big snake from the inside out kind of thing. But Hera kind of sensed that she was using her son to do that, and he was afraid. He was like, "Hey, if this guy goes and meets the emperor up there, they might really like this guy. They might like him better than they like me, and make him king." And so he just straight up had him killed. All right, just straight up had an assassination put out on him. But the second, there was a power struggle between Augustus and Mark Antony. All right. And because Herod owed his throne to Rome, he then had to pick a side, and he picked Mark Antony's side. But Mark Antony lost, which means that Herod then had to prove his loyalty to Augustus. All right, which Augustus probably just didn't want to go through the hassle of finding a replacement for him. So he was just like, "Yeah, you're fine. You're just on a shorter leash, and you can't interact with, other, leaders with other areas." Um, y- but unrelated to that, I'm sure he killed several of his family members, including his second wife, the Maramian, the first chick. And along with that, he had 2,000 bodyguards, which I think really speaks to his paranoia after he himself had ordered an assassination hit on a family member for purely political reasons. Like that, it seems like his paranoia was going out of the like just um. But now we get into a bit of the meat and potatoes of the situation. His reign through Judea. All right, so he used harsh security methods. Herod used harsh security methods whenever it came to enforcing the law. As already said, whenever he was first given it, he cleared the whole area out of bandits by most likely killing them the second that they were found. Um, and he apparently had secret police that would go into the cities and report back any kind of discontent that they heard growing from the people. And he would also use them to forcefully silence political opponents, and he either banned or tried to ban protests. All right, it's unclear. All right. Um, but there were a couple of times where he really helped his people. Like there was one time when there was a famine that occurred in 25 BCE. He, helped out with provisions there. But I think a lot of that too, based off his track record of being a bitch, um, is more or less a hey, we can't use them if they're dead kind of philosophy. And so that was kind of, I think, why he helped him out there. But he tried to do several things like that, but he did even more for Rome. Like, whenever he was doing because he did a lot of, so Herod also did a lot of architectural work. Um, because part of Rome's big push was for more like one of Augustus's big pushes for like the Roman Empire was that they use the same architecture, they have the same principles, cultures, governing styles. It was an imperial mindset, not good. All right, because you're forcing everyone else to be exactly like you, and like while that makes the world exactly like you, that's not necessarily a good thing because you're ruling over everyone with an iron fist and everybody only thinks like you because you're forcing them to think like you. So but Herod had many architectural achievements because that was one of his main things. One of which that was kind of a slap in the face was that whenever he was doing the expansion on the Second Temple of Jerusalem, which he did again as a political ploy, um, he added a golden eagle at the entrance of it. The eagle, known as Aquila in Latin, is a significant symbol of ancient Rome and represents dominion and might, becoming synonymous with the Roman emperor's enduring strength. Yeah, so I could definitely see why people would have a problem with that. Like, geez. Yeah, wow, that is some incredible blazing that he's doing to Rome right there, because this was a giant eagle, a giant golden eagle. All right. Um, but on top of that, there were two main religious factions, as far as I understand about this. I will have to do more research and go in depth in it, but I can't do all the research all at once. But there were two main uh like sects of like religious police. There was the Pharisees and there was the Sadducees. And what Herod had done that angered the Sadducees was that he replaced all of their high priests with foreign ones from Babylonia and Alexandria, which they did not like at all. Um, he goes and, but while we're on the topic of architecture, another little sidestep here. He actually built several structures on the purpose of improving public image and providing strongholds and fortification in the event of an insurrection. And so, I mean, like, they were archaeological achievements slash backup plans that are the expansion of the Temple Mount, uh, Hycratia, Herodonium, Macarius, all of which, except for the Mount, were converted into fortresses because the Mount was a very public temple area. It seems like Herod was trying to appease three people all at once: all of the Roman people, all of the Jewish people, and Augustus in particular. All right. So he was constantly trying to appease these people, and they wanted to, like I said, they wanted to spread Roman culture, architecture. Uh, and so he actually built the third temple of Jerusalem, and he named it the Augustadium, the Augustium, in honor of Emperor Augustus. So here are a couple of footnotes about that too. The most famous one was the expansion on the Second Temple, which was not completed until likely 20 years after his death. It was for his own grandeur and to help relations with the Jewish people. The irrigation systems were made by him, which, good job. Good job. You made sure your people had clean water, at least. Good, good. Um, and he and Cleopatra owned a monopoly over the asphalt that was being mined from the Dead Sea, and also leased copper mines from Roman Empire, which makes perfect sense, honestly, because it's like you want to pay us to use your own equipment and people and lives to mine this stuff just for us to take it back in taxes anyway. Sure, man, you go right ahead. Um, But something else that I think is very, very interesting that was in this Wikipedia post that I'm not sure about, I'll have to do more research into. But according to it, there is no written accounting of the Massacre of the Innocents. So, for those of you who do not know, the Massacre of the Innocents was that after the wise men met with Jesus, or met with Herod to figure out where the baby Jesus was, the he pointed them to Babylon. He told them to let him know where they were at, so or where he was at, so he can go and worship him too. But he was planning on killing him instead. And so he was wise men were warned by angels, and so was Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. They were, they all fled. And so Hera couldn't find him. So Hera was like, "Well, I know the area, so I'll just go through, and it's been about 2 years, so I'll just go through and kill every, boy 2 years and younger, and problem solved." Um, but there's actually no written account of that happening except in the Bible, in Matthew, which leads to three things or three options. Um, it leads to either A, Matthew was using it for a literary device, which I don't believe so, because inside of this version specifically, it is not used in any kind of poetic fashion. It is not used in any kind of any fashion. It is used as a historical reference of the birth of the baby Jesus, of the Messiah, and that has been fabricated now, according to the fact that uh there is no written aspect of it other than Matthew. All right, that's one aspect of it. So the second option is that it was like folklore or a story that came up out of reputation, which Harold did not have a good reputation. Nobody liked him. Or three, there are some that even say that because Babylon was such a small, condensed area, and there was only a handful of boys that could have been born in that time frame, that there may have been like a dozen, 3 dozen tops, like boys around 2 years old in Babylon at that time. And so maybe it wasn't a big enough massacre to like get a historical writing of it or something like that. But those are kind of the three options that come to that. But even then, because there's no written historical record other than Matthew, I have to throw that entire part of the story out. Now, that does not take away all of Matthew. All right. Um, Matthew, has a lot of the same connections in it as Mark, Luke, and John, and so those are still accurate, I would say. You have to remember these are separate books that have been condensed down into, a theological study, um, or at least a canon theological history, we'll say. Um, and so just because one book in there has something in it that is not historically written down, A, does not necessarily mean that it didn't happen, and B, does not mean that the entirety of the whole thing is garbage. Now, it does take away from the credibility, but that does not take away from the credibility of Jesus. That takes away from the credibility of Matthew as a writer. We'll say that. Um, so that's more or less my thoughts on that. Now we have reached the end, his death. The death of Herod the Great was in Jericho, and apparently it was from an illness referred to as Herod's evil. And it says that he tried to kill himself by stabbing himself in the gut, but that didn't work. And apparently he became a melodramatic drama queen because after that, he felt like no one would miss him whenever he died. And so he called all of the distinguished people, or at least big group of distinguished people from his cabinet or whatever you want to call it, to meet with him. And he told him that after he dies, they are to kill each other so that the level of grief inside of the kingdom or the dynasty is higher. That is deranged. That is absolutely deranged. And thank God that his siblings did not carry out that final demand. That would have been crazy. Um, but people argue over the specifics of his death. Some say that it was in 4 BCE, some say it was in 1 BCE, some say that his sons changed his death year back, so that it wasn't like they didn't start their reign at 1 BCE kind of thing. Like it's a weird thing, like how presidents shave their mustaches and stuff like that before they go, because having a mustache makes you look more like a suspicious character or something along those lines. It's behavioral arts and things like that. I don't know enough about. If you are interested, there is a channel called The Behavioral Arts. Check it out. Dude's awesome. Um, but he did die in Jericho. they actually made a tomb for him like he wanted, and the guy that wrote about all of this, apparently, his name, Josephus, Josephus, something like that. But he wrote Antiquities of the Jews and Jewish War. Um, there was another guy named Cassius Dio,
Oh, you thought your
a primary source.
gonna be with JoJo? Nah, it was with me.
Um, but I didn't look anything into these people. I didn't do anything like that. This is a video that I researched today, and I only have 4 days to make it. I'm trying to see and get together a schedule, and to do that, I have to make one entire video in a week to see what the workload's like, see what the research load is like, and all of that different stuff. That's completely separate. So, according to Josephus, he marked where the tomb was. Like, he said that, like, go this direction, 1,000 furlongs, right where he wanted it at. Which they actually found a tomb right there. All right. But whenever they were like got to like the main chamber, all they found open was a smashed open sarcophagus, and nothing else. So to me, that screams of grave robbing. I don't know, but there are some people that like because the body wasn't found there, it's like that's not conclusive. Which I'm like, yes, I get that from a historical and a legislative, not legislative, a logistical point of view, but it's in the exact spot that the dude who recorded the history of it said it was in. I think that we can infer, you know what I mean? Like if we find an empty grave, let me put this into this, all right? That's like someone writing a note being like, I buried Tristan up on a hill in Mayberry. All right. And then you get to the spot where they said that they buried her at. But whenever you like dig up the grave, all right, like there's a tombstone there. You see the tombstone, all right? And it's exactly where they said it would be. Whenever you dig it up, there's no body there. And so you're like, well, that's inconclusive. I mean, there's no body here. So, I mean, no, it just means that somebody took it. Because you got the tombstone, you got the fresh grave, you got the confession. What else do you need? But that's just whatever. But there was one last part of it that I wanted to bring up. And this was just honestly kind of a savage, too savage of a comment about the massacre of the innocents that I'd had to put in here. It was in the remarks about Herod's rule, but apparently Macrobius, something like that, in 400 CE, who was one of the last pagan writers in Rome. He was one of the last pagan writers in Rome. In his book Saturnate Saturnalia, uh, wrote when it was heard that as part of the slaughter of boys up to 2 years old, Herod, king of the Jews, had ordered his own son to be killed. He, the Emperor Augustus, remarked, it is better to be Herod's pig than his son. And this was in reference to how Herod, as a Jew, would not kill pigs, but had 3 of his sons and many others killed. That is absolutely savage. That is Roman savagery right there. And I ain't heard savagery that eloquent and that well written since John the Baptist. All right. But anyway, that's the video. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, please click like, subscribe, and check out the description for any kind of links or anything that you would like for the Wikipedia page or anything that I have linked down there. Come follow me on Twitch. I go and I host it at Sage Game Time. There's gonna be a link in the description for that too. I have another channel, Set the Sloth, where I'm going to try and start posting other videos that are maybe a little less that are a little less religiously themed and more haha themed, or maybe even a little more serious themed about just political things, or maybe just cultural things, or just things in general. Maybe I'll just make a comment video, a frequently asked questions video, or something like that. Who knows? But until then, till the next one. Love you guys. Praise God. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye. So primary source